Okay, I think, Emily, we can get going here. Again, just want to welcome everyone to Building Better Mobile Experiences, a fireside chat with Riot Games, Nextdoor, and of course, Sentry.io. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. So just briefly going over our agenda, first I want to say, Sentry is really fortunate. We get to work with millions of developers, right, of code creators every month. But we also get to work with some pretty large enterprise companies and some really interesting use cases. So today we just wanted to set some time aside to chat with some key partners here and get into some larger use cases, specifically looking at mobile. But we encourage folks after this session today to give us some feedback. We'd love to talk about a slew of different topics, ranging from anything you might be interested in and pull in the appropriate partners there. So please give us some feedback. Just from an agenda perspective, right? Welcome and intros, which we're getting into right now, followed by the panel discussion, and then, hopefully a really kind of lively open Q&A for any folks who have questions for, Riot on one hand, Nextdoor, and then as well as Zoe Chu represents Sentry's mobile product, so maybe some internal stuff as well. So just really briefly want to touch on the fact that Sentry is an open source company, right? We love serving our developers. That's our mission here. So please interact with us on Discord. Feel free to ping us on GitHub as well. And then feel free to reach out website and all the socials. We'd love to hear from you. And we're always looking for feedback in terms of where we want to go as a product. All right, so our esteemed panelists. We have Walt, Leung, hearkening from Nextdoor, Julius Skripkauskas from Riot Games. I believe he's somewhere in the Arctic right now, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, Zoe Chu rounding us out, running product on the mobile side for Sentry. I'll give myself a brief plug as well. My name is Don Dionda. I've been at Sentry for almost 6 years, so I've seen a lot of seasons here, but I'm just extremely excited about where we're headed and pumped to be bringing this discussion to you today. So, but first though, we do have a quick poll, a good evocative question. What is your biggest challenge as a mobile developer? We'll give you about a minute or so to answer the question. All right, looks like Walt may be suffering a power outage. Oh, there he is.
A localized power outage.
Nice. Well, we love the background. Look at that production value. We need that at Sentry as well. Okay, maybe 20 more seconds, producer Emily, and then we can move on. Okay, I think we're ready to move to the next slide. Excellent. So the panel discussion, finally, let's get into it. So Walt, Julius, Zoe, thanks again for joining today. A lot's gone on, right? 2021, Nextdoor enters the public markets. Riot Games actually becomes Riot Games instead of Riot Game, League of Legends, and is now fundamentally kind of a media conglomerate, right? Arcane wins a bunch of awards, and I believe was the #1 show on Netflix for a time there. So pretty amazing stuff. But I think with that being said, talk to me a little bit about yourselves, how you got to where you are today, and then maybe transition to what's top of mind at Riot and Nextdoor. Walt, I'll hand it to you, man.
Cool. Thanks, Don. So yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Walt. I've been at Nextdoor for about 4 years now. For those who don't know, Nextdoor, we're a social media platform that focus on local communities. So you can imagine from a product or technological basis, we run feed and discover based content formats, and we monetize on both a mix of subscriptions and general advertising. So I came here today largely because I currently work on our iOS infrastructure team. And so we have a big platform focus, which means that we naturally care tons about topics concerning our app's performance and stability. And that's been a huge help, thanks to the folks from Sentry. So I'll leave it off on there. I'm sure we'll have plenty to get into. I'm not sure, am I passing it to Julius or do I pass
Yeah,
back?
that's the hot potato, man.
Well, all right, hot potato, it's going to Julius.
Thank you for the potato. Hey folks, I'm a mobile developer with over 10 years of experience. In the past, I have worked with a lot of different companies on a lot of different projects and different technologies. I have had a luxury of choosing the clients and projects I wanted to work with as a contracted for quite a while. Coincidentally, a lot of projects have been around media and Internet of Things at mobile applications, but that's like a while ago. For past 5 years, I have been working with Riot on their Riot mobile companion app, which is essentially trying to combine all of that media conglomerate stuff Don mentioned into one single source for users to come to and interact with Riot. And I hope people know what Riot is. It's a game studio. It's quite large company, as Don said. Quite recently, it became Riot Games instead of Riot Game. Joking, it was always Riot Games, but I'm here to just share the challenges we have run into building mobile experiences and Riot Games and Riot Mobile.
Awesome, thanks for that. I think, just really quick, let's just get into org structure. So Walt, are you more kind of vertical, horizontal? Talk to us about the structure of mobile as well as any challenges maybe that you see with that.
Yeah, so I would describe it as vertical. I guess it sort of depends on the axis. So we have here at Nextdoor, we have probably over a dozen-ish product teams, and they're all supported by a single platform engineering team, which is my team. Our ratio is probably higher on the product end than most other companies. So we traditionally have held about 1 to 10 or about a 1 to 20 ratio of product to platform to product engineers on our mobile teams. So this goes across iOS and Android. And then our product teams then have anywhere from none, depending on what product they work on, to quite a few mobile engineers, like somewhere up to 5 maybe. And they always have a different mix of experience. We go from anywhere from new grads learning mobile to folks who have basically been around ever since the iPhone came out, and we're building mobile interfaces since then, and in some cases even some interfaces pre iOS or Android.
Nice. So the dinosaurs like us in 2009. I love it. What about and any challenges though? Like I guess if you were to kind of put your structural hat on, right? Do you like what you're doing? I mean, have you seen some interesting changes? Maybe just dig in a little there.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, from an org structure perspective, when you have teams in the structure that we have it, as opposed to traditionally maybe more horizontal, where you might have a single mobile team that kind of floats around. For us, when we have mobile engineers embedded into product teams, it's harder from a platform engineering perspective, where we're supposed to be leading all of our iOS technical strategy or all of our Android technical strategy. It becomes hard to sort of stay in sync with every team. And it's primarily because you have sort of competing priorities. If we really boil it down, technical priorities, which are not necessarily going to be top of mind for a product team, directly compete with product priorities, which may not be necessarily top of mind for an infrastructure team. And so one of our really big challenges is always common infrastructure. It always faces adoption challenges internally here at Nextdoor. So examples might be on on iOS, most companies probably who have been around for a while have spent a lot of time trying to get rid of legacy language like Objective-C and move on to Swift. But you can imagine that if you already have a feature that works and you're putting your product hat on and you really think about it and you start asking yourself, okay, why should I spend the week or two to convert this into Swift when I'm not really getting any numbers to come back to me? Or on Android, something like unified tracking or moving on to Compose. These are just things generally where we always have problems due to org structure on trying to get common infrastructure adopted. I think bankers, like they say, you can't eat IRR, and for us, we can't. Maybe the technological equivalent is like you can't eat cool code, right? So any infrastructure that you're building at the end of the day, in our org structure, our biggest challenge is always the adoption, trying to make sure that we can not just convince our engineers that we have good solutions, but also help them and in many ways lead the evangelism and adoption of any kind of common infra.
Got it. Thank you for that. And Sweat. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, really quickly to follow up, would you qualify your org structure as a foundation? How would you qualify your organization? Like, would you say it's mobile first, mobile, like web first, or web focused, or mobile focused? I think the structure does kind of fall into one of those 4 categories, and it lends itself better to one of those 4 categories.
That's right. I have thought about this in the past. So, I mean, from a pure user-based perspective, we are definitely mobile first in the sense that a significant majority of our users consume content on iOS and Android, and because we're primarily in the US, it's actually mostly iOS. But that doesn't necessarily always reflect in the mix of engineering skill set here at Nextdoor, or even how teams are structured, right? It's not necessarily that mobile is forefront in how we think about team structuring. A lot of times, I would say we are a product driven and product led company, which means that the teams often revolve around the product structure. The one caveat is our platform engineering teams, which are much more technologically focused, and so we are able to kind of like staff those according to what we might consider like a mobile first, or essentially based on our technological needs there.
Awesome. Thanks for that. So Julius, I will ask you the same exact question, and then we'll get into kind of more the tech stack and getting into some of the Jetpack stuff. But yeah, please, talk to us about the structure over there.
I think I will keep it probably short, just because a lot of things I think resonate with what Walt said. Riot being as big as it is, obviously is quite vertical in its structure. At a technical level, we do get a lot of autonomy, and in fact, a lot of things do not necessarily go from top to down, but from bottom up. So developers do have a lot of power. That does impose some challenges. Naturally, if you have power to make a decision, then you likely do not have the luxury of sitting back and waiting until the decision is made for you. And then you need to obviously advocate for changes across the company. I believe Zoe asked a question, what's your category you would fit the company in? And honestly, Riot is none of the listed ones. It's focusing purely on gaming, right? Even though there's games on desktop, there's games on mobile, it is mainly gaming company and not like mobile company. That does mean that the project I'm working on, which is mobile companion app and not the game, does kind of exist in this challenging position where the services around the company are distributed for a specific product. Something might exist for a specific game, but we are in this phase of trying to connect everything. So that means we have to kind of go through the entire company, build these bridges with different parts of the organization, advocate for a better mobile support for the existing non-mobile infrastructure.
Got it. And so just on that point, Julius, talk to us a little bit about the tech stack, right? what do you use today? What's kind of the methodology, the thought process, and maybe the evolution of how you got to where you are today?
Right. What we use today is pretty much just vanilla native applications. The project I'm working on is using Kotlin and Swift. We do have, because it's an older project, actually, we're only in the beginning of migrating to declarative UI, so we're not fully, using Swift UI or Jetpack Compose. We're still on the UI kit and just regular views. We are using Kotlin multi-platforms to get best out of two worlds, kind of use the or have native applications while having a capability to still share some code and not depend on fully cross-platform frameworks or anything like that. The Riot as a whole has lower level C++ libraries that might also have some mobile logic, and usually we're using Objective-C or Java there. Talking about the past, because this has been an old project, the experience, for instance, with Kotlin multi-platform is not entirely a new thing. Before that, we used JTOP-C, which for those who don't know, it's I don't know if yet another Google abandoned project, but it's Google's project to transpile Java code into Objective-C so you could use it on iOS. It was an interesting experience. Yeah, that's a high level of our tech stack here.
Nice. Thank you. I'll pass the same hot potato to Walt. Give us a little background on what you're working with today and how you got there.
It's actually fairly similar. So we do run two completely native app stacks, which are also kind of vanilla. So iOS and Swift, and Android and Kotlin. GraphQL is our intermediation with other surfaces. We've tried cross-platform applications in the past, primarily with React Native when that was a hot thing, and it served us for a while. I think one thing was just as we continue to scale and grow, it just ended up that we need like the custom functionality, performance, and feature set from what a native language might offer technically, and then also part of it is from culturally, we needed to have like engineers be able to debug their own stuff. And so when we used to have more of the app using like web views or server-driven UI, it was much harder because you would have like a mobile experience that was there, but you needed someone else, even though you were a mobile engineer, to help you debug your app, right? And so multi-platform is something that we're obviously still keeping an eye on, especially as Julius mentioned, Kotlin multi-platform. And we're also somewhat early in declarative UI frameworks. We're further along on the Android side, where I would say a majority of Android views in our application are built on Compose, but that is almost completely the opposite for the iOS application, where only a handful are built in Swift UI.
Oh, okay. Well, I think Zoe, I saw you nodding over there. Are we doing stuff with Jetpack Compose or not yet?
Well, we are doing a lot of stuff with Jetpack Compose as well as Swift UI, but I actually wanted to follow up on Walt's question on kind of the implementation of Compose, and Julius had mentioned this too. So your implementation of Compose and Swift UI, why do you think they're at two different levels? What is it that Google's doing and Apple's not doing, or conversely, what are you waiting for that migration to happen, like to fully transition over?
Julius, you want to take that one?
I'm thinking about it. I don't think there's as much difference in how fast Android and iOS is moving, but in general, yeah, it's a difficult question to answer why iOS developers are not adopting as fast. It depends if we're looking at the percentage also or absolute numbers. It's just usually a lower number of iOS folks to go around. I think it might be also just the fact that on iOS UI kit works well. If you follow right standards, it works. So there's not as much pain points at some point, at some degree, to have to migrate to a different tool with hopes that it will make things better.
One thing we've been struggling on the iOS front for a few years now, it's becoming less of a problem, but right when Swift UI was introduced, every essential version of iOS would basically introduce like there several breaking changes, but also just like several changes to Swift UI from like how you would even use it as a developer. So for some of the common components that we actually have built in Swift UI that do run in native code here at Nextdoor, what we have are like we have all these if version checks, right? Which end up being pretty clunky because now you kind of have like different logic for different operating systems, and so I think that was hindering our adoption for a while. But I think as Julie said, yeah, like UIKit works well. We have quite a few internal frameworks in place to even help you make it work even more well, right? And when you get to that point, the need to kind of adopt Swift UI is probably less. A lot of it just feels right now, we think it's a cool technology, and we think it's going to make things work a lot faster, but it's not at a point where the app layout is breaking or something, and we need to use this new format. Otherwise, if we want like a high performing app, it's not to that point yet.
And I think this is an opportunity for me to kind of introduce our first plug, which is, Sentry Performance. We do have Jetpack Compose basically out of the box now, for, navigation as well as UI into interactions, and then in the form of spans and breadcrumbs. But we're also kind of approaching it from how do we get in deeper? How do we get more information out of it? How do we get more context? So that means compose functions and compose metrics. And then for Swift UI, right now, because of the level of development that Swift UI has from Apple, we actually allow you to auto-instrument it as much as you possibly can. Basically, we wrap it. So even if it's custom transactions, we give you that wrapper to kind of to instrument Swift UI should you have it in your application. So these are definitely functions that you guys have heard me talk about before. And always love feedback when you guys do explore into our newer features. So Don, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, and actually, Zoe, just one more question on that,
Yeah.
and minor curveball, but it's more process.
Sure.
What I mean, I'm always pretty blown away that Sentry is kind of staying ahead of the curve, right? So how did we know to kind of focus on this? Like, were we watching this and are just chatting with developers, or how did we know that we wanted to kind of stay ahead here?
So Sentry is for developers always and forever. That is our primary target goal. You guys are the people we talk to. And so we knew that there was going to be a wide adoption of Jetpack Compose. It is the number one. It's basically going to be the future of Android Compose. And Swift, albeit has a slow adoption, Apple is really pushing for that to be kind of that UI kit replacement. So we learned that not only through just kind of research, but in talking to our customers and understanding kind of what their adoption cycles are, especially for new technologies. So customers are incredibly important to us in terms of learning what's coming and what's in the future for mobile.
Nice. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for that. And then just transitioning a little, Walt, you had mentioned, these terms performance, right? I may have heard a KPI or not, but talk to me a little bit about that. Like, what are you guys measuring when it comes to the health of the app, what you're putting into production? Talk to us about some of the key things you're looking at, and maybe what your process is as an organization in measuring health.
Yeah, absolutely. So as an infra team, and as we've scaled the past 2 years, I think this is also part of it. More and more of our focus has gone internally towards the developer experience as maybe a traditional infrastructure team may go, but we still hold like a decent sized external focus. We report out our app performance to company leadership because we have like that horizontal oversight on how the entire application is performing, not just a specific vertical product area. And so externally, we used to, and we still actually directly put KPIs or I guess OKRs. We use like the OKR framework on external metrics such as TTI. So that's probably our primary one. That's time to interactive I'm not sure, like that might be a different term elsewhere, but it's essentially how soon it takes before your application is usable from essentially, when you touch the app icon. Things like crashes, hang rates, scroll performance. It's really, we're here trying to like measure what we care about. And in some of these cases, we've had to, go out of our way to actually figure out a system in order to quantify this. So one thing that we did pretty recently was scrolling performance. And so, Apple always provides you data through Organizer on all kinds of things around scroll hitching or hang rates. But what we realized was there wasn't a good way to actually understand like how to map that data into what the user is experiencing. And so we create like a small system to basically measures frame drop rates and hang rates. And then lo and behold, a few months later, we get a nice update from your team saying, hey, we have hang rates directly going into Sentry. And so, we had a very naive tool that just spat out a number. And when this came out within Sentry, we're able to get like these giant stack traces, which actually helps us fix it, right? And then internally for KPIs, we often ask our teams for a high level idea of their issues. So one example recently was iOS and our unit test coverage. And so we've traditionally had not the greatest unit test coverage inside our Swift code base. And part of that is, we're not as modularized as we want to be. We don't have many like dependency injected classes or services in place. And so we'll identify like the key points, like the key barriers to these like big chunks of work. And then we'll essentially set like OKRs around that and provide, a key metric on, hey, what percentage of our service classes have been dependency injected. But this is all done, with support and agreement from all of our teams. And so anything internal, it's often like a collaborative effort where we'll ask for feedback from our teams and then kind of set KPIs as we go there.
Got it. And then one more question, then Zoe, I don't know if you want to touch on anything, but I guess just generally, like what is a high performing application experience for you guys? Like, is there a set, like a percentile? Is there a North Star you guys aim for? Like maybe drill into that for folks here.
Yeah, I mean, we can take something as simple as as TTI, right? And so the lower the number, always the better. But there ends up being a trade-off between you kind of get into the law of diminishing returns, and so obviously we would love to have a TTI on any screen, any surface, under several hundred milliseconds. That would be absolutely amazing if we could both do the client-side logic, take a round trip to the server and come back and display all the UI within a few hundred milliseconds. And so I think, there is a North Star in terms of where we think where we want performance to get to. But then we'll often like back out from that and essentially, set goals for a certain quarter or a certain chunk of work that says, hey, we might want to focus on TTI or focus on scrolling performance, but it's not like we're going to get to 0 frame drops, right? But we might actually just set a bar and say we're going to reduce it by 25-30% for now, or better yet, if we've actually identified the big chunks ahead of time, like maybe there's some main thread IO accidentally, right? Or perhaps a certain animation is taking a little too long because we've accidentally reconfigured a cell too many times because of a bug. Then we're able to actually take those big chunks and kind of like get a guess of how much it would solve, and then that will get set as a goal. But generally, the North Star is always somewhere super far, and we're just like trying to make these incremental steps to get there.
So I have 2 follow-up questions, really. So mobile developers have commonly commented on the fact that they can be a little bit distant from the user experience. How important are UX metrics, like things like scroll hitching or TTI, compared to things like device metrics, so like CPU or memory usage? Any thoughts on that?
Here at Nextdoor, or I don't know, this might be me injecting my personal bias in here as well. I've always cared much more about the user side of it, and in many cases, what we might call like device metrics, they do actually impact users to a certain extent. So one thing we dealt with quite recently was battery performance, and so we had an SDK that we were using, which was kind of draining our battery much more than expected. And while battery is typically thought of as like a device metric, the second you start getting user complaints saying that, hey, when I use a Nextdoor app or when the Nextdoor app runs in the background, I feel the back of my phone heating up, that is now like a user complaint, right? And that is almost as high, or in that case, it will be treated with higher priority than just like a crash rate or TTI. But we generally care here a lot more about what our users are seeing and experiencing over maybe device metrics, or even like internal like DX metrics, such as build times. I would say, as a principle, we probably would rather reduce our user TTI by 30% rather than reduce like our internal build times by 30%, right? It's kind of that trade-off where we try to put our users first.
Mm-hmm. And the second question, Julius, feel free to hop in if you'd like as well, is what triggers your organization, or more widely, what triggers an organization to go from like errors to performance? Basically from going, I'm monitoring my errors, okay, but I need more.
I can take this first, and Julius, if you want to follow on. So, as a consumer application, I think we all use consumer products, right? And sometimes you're just using your own app and you're just like, WTF is going on. And that is actually like more often not what triggers any kind of investigation into mobile performance. So, we've had several big spikes in the past few years around trying to fix mobile performance. Once around TTI, when essentially enough people started just using the app, and we're just literally asking ourselves, hey, I'm seeing this loading screen for like just way too long. It doesn't feel right. When I use another app like Facebook or Messenger, Facebook Family, or even some smaller applications, Twitter, it loads much faster, right? And there's nothing in the laws of physics that says like we have to load slower. And so I think that's a big component, which is just using the app and using other apps and just having a feeling like something doesn't feel right. And then we start defining metrics and numbers that we want to hit, and then those end up being the backstop for the future. But that's kind of where we are right
now. I think we're in similar space as Walt, where it's mostly us using it and saying this is not ideal, we need to do better. That's the best route. The alternative routes here are either using user testing, creating posts, and learning from your user base that the app is not performing. And the worst scenario is users just telling you through bad reviews and calls to support that things are bad. So hopefully you can get there with just using your own product, and that's how we got there.
Nice. Okay, great. I think just really quickly, we'll be moving on in a second here, but I did get the poll results. And not surprisingly, the winner by a decent amount, 47%. So what is your biggest challenge as a mobile developer? The number one answer was app stability, parentheses, crash rates, and ANRs. Any surprise there? Do we expect that in anything?
No, I think app stability is table stakes for mobile. Like you need to know your crash free rate, session rate. You need to know your ANR rate. You need to know that these things aren't stopping your users from using your application, because bad experience is ultimately the biggest, like it's the biggest crux to anybody using your application. Sentry plug number 2 is that we've started implementing ANR rate. But we actually have a whole ANR story that we're starting to form. And so not only do you get to see ANR issues in your platform, but we've actually created an ANR rate with a link that goes directly to the issues that correlate to your ANR rate. So that's actually story part 1. So that's going from ANR rate to A&R issues. Now, part 2 of this story is something that we're working on today, which is we're adding thread context and lock reason. So we can actually tell you which thread is blocking the thread from which thread is blocking your active threads from actually processing or running, and for what reason. And so that is story part 2. Story part 3 is that because we've actually started identifying performance issues. So issues that are, not exactly issues that would pop up in your stream because they don't alert you, but issues that are like root causes of A&R. So performance problems that can cause A&Rs, things like file IO, database query in the main thread. Those are things that we're starting to identify and root cause because we know that there are causes of A&Rs, and our goal is to be able to correlate these simple root causes to such that you can fix them and reduce the overall conglomerate of a problem, which is A&Rs and app hangs. So that is our A&R story, and that's what we're really trying here at Sentry, to basically reduce the complexity of problems, reduce the effort that you have to take to understand and fix issues. So that's my take and my plug.
Hey, we love a good plug. I think in a second we're going to transition to Q&A, right? I appreciate everyone answering the questions. Last question, right? To get a little pie in the sky. So in a couple of years, right, Chat GPT 88 will come out, right? Our lives will continually be disrupted and hopefully augmented and better. But, there's new technologies, right? You hear about Neuralink, you hear about augmented reality. And right now we're all experiencing everything right here, right in the palm of our hand on mobile. Where's mobile headed? If you guys have been involved in the space, you're OGs, if you will. What, like, projecting 5 years ahead, like where do you think the space is headed? And this is a very hot potato, and it's spicy. I'm throwing this one to Julius.
Why me? Depends on how futuristic we go. Obviously, robots can take over and we can live a Terminator movie in real life. But I hope nothing changes too much, at least in coming few years. I think the paradigm shift with declarative UI is enough for now. I especially hope more API stability for Jetpack Compose in coming year or two. Interesting how multi-platform or the cross-platform is going to evolve. And anecdotally, in recent couple of years, I'm not hearing as much about React Native anymore, and more kind of like shifting towards Flutter. I am excited on where the Kotlin multi-platform is going to move, obviously, because we use it. I'm interested in what is going to be that next big player in cross-platform. Is it going to be progressive web apps? Is it going to be something else? I do foresee Google and Apple still pushing for larger screens, for larger formats. So tablet support is at very least going to be pushed for. There's obviously the foldable devices now that come into existence. I don't see it happening soon, but who knows, when a form factor which would work for all of the mainstream users is found, I'm pretty sure at that point Apple will jump in, and at that point everyone will use a foldable device. What's next after that? Is it AI? Is it us all living in metaverse? I have no idea. Walt.
Appreciate that. And really quick, Walt, before you get going, we are going to transition in a moment to Q&A. I have a couple questions here, but just folks, please think over the next minute, and I encourage you to ask a couple questions. I'll read those out in a few moments. There's the quick plug. Walt, please, the future.
Yeah. One thing that's super maybe on the meta level is kind of the interface in which we might interact with technological products in our lives, right? And so that's kind of it's been mobile for the past definitely the past decade, maybe even longer for some folks who got in really early. Like you imagine what you carry around every single day, and those people probably say, I guess by far it's your phone, but that might change in the next following decades, right? As wearables devices, if if certain people's futures actually pan out, then we might all be walking on like augmented reality headsets and whatnot. But chances are more than not that these are kind of going to be somewhat similar to building mobile, because at the end of the day, we probably have an interface and we want to build applications on top of it. And so I don't know, I don't really have strong opinions there. It's kind of like both a weak opinion and loosely held. But zooming back in a little bit, I think what I'm most excited about the next several years is probably around three things. That's frameworks, tooling, and community. And I think this is largely seeing how the development of web applications has grown, because web applications are definitely a couple decades ahead of us, or earlier than us. I think that's the right way to phrase it. And so, is when you're building a web app nowadays, you start with a framework. That's kind of it's almost a non-starter, and there's so many to choose from, all with their kind of like pros and cons, and all of them are pretty much good, right? And for us on mobile, is Apple always kind of gonna be giving us our framework, or is there gonna be more and more developer essentially community in the future? And same with tooling. I mean, one thing I mentioned earlier is obviously, we always have our own naive tools built internally at Nextdoor, because we're not here to build tools, right? We're here to build products. But then anytime we work with a company like Sentry that can actually provide very advanced tooling for the exact same use case, it's always like a no-brainer. And being able to kind of see more and more tooling, maybe around tracking performance, and even like a UI framework in place, like that would be really awesome for me to see, just like a bigger selection set. And similar to like the community, I think personally as a mobile developer, especially when I was learning mobile, it was much harder to actually find places to learn from, which was a bit surprising, because that's almost the opposite from like the React or the web community, where it's like everything's always like build and deploy a web app. It's almost like there's a race to what framework can get you a web app out in the least number of minutes, right? And almost on mobile, it's not necessarily like that. It feels much harder to find that kind of to find a community to learn from that's not within a company. And so I think as mobile grows, we'll probably see that across both iOS and Android, and yeah, and everything that Julius touched on, I think I agree with it.
I have two follow-up questions plus a plug. So two questions. First is, well, you and Julius both touched on this a little bit, and this is kind of a sci-fi-y kind of question with like wearables and headsets and who knows, contact lenses where you can see everything in front of you in the future. Is it imperative that we separate kind of mobile software from mobile hardware? Because mobile hardware is probably something that might fall off a cliff at some point, but mobile software, on the other hand, is probably something that will be prolonged, let's say, because you're talking about like app technology, you're talking about building apps fast. So I don't know. I've wondered if you can often kind of disassociate mobile software from mobile hardware.
I think one dissociation that's maybe happened recently is, the language itself, right? Swift and Kotlin. I mean, Kotlin's probably way more advanced in this front, but we used to think of these as mobile languages, but I think pretty recently, within a year or so, Google made Kotlin their official like supported backend language for all developers at Google, right? And recently in the newer Swift versions, with native, I guess, Swift concurrency, it's becoming more and more viable as like a server-side language. And so now you're kind of at a point where, okay, these languages that used to be considered very mobile only have now been taken out of their mobile context. It's still more or less the exact same language, and now are able to be used in other contexts as well, right? So I think you're right. You can easily split out what like the mobile OS is, or maybe even like mobile technologies, or how you might think about building mobile interfaces and applications, away from your device, which has to be 1 pound on a 8.5 by 5 inch screen that you interact with your fingers. Like that can probably be abstracted away at a certain point. And I think if we get to a point where these other devices become more and more practical, then I would probably expect developers to actually start thinking that way too.
I think what Walt said does resonate with me, that there's basically layers here that can be disassociated from mobile development and can be ported to other areas. I think also the Android ecosystem has been a good example of Android as pretty much a mobile OS panning across more than just your phone. It did support, or it does support, watch devices. It did support, or maybe still does, Android Things, which is Internet of Things OS. It has Android TV, same as Apple has TVs and car support and all of these things. So definitely, if there's a future with more different mobile devices, I do see these OSs evolving to support those. Obviously, there's also a potential that there's a company somewhere that will build out a completely different experience, and not everything would be able to carry over from what exists currently in mobile, but some of it definitely will always exist no matter where hardware goes.
I'm going to skip my second question in favor of a Q&A, but my last plug is that you guys have both actually talked about cross platforms, and I kind of want to plug that Sentry has the kind of the largest support for cross platform and native platform support for mobile. So that's Android, that's iOS, that's .NET MAUI now, that's Flutter, that's React Native, and we are actually on the brink of releasing our first release of Kotlin MP. So you guys had talked about that, and I wanted to kind of put that out there that we've been working on it, and we're kind of working on making sure that we fine tune it before we release it. And so that is what we are on the brink of, and we will be the first to the market with an official release and support. So that's, you know, out there for you guys to try. John, I'll pass it back to you.
Love that. We love the plugs, Zoe. Keep them coming. And again, GitHub, open source, guys. Please reach out and give us your feedback, and we'll impact our direction. So speaking of direction, need to move to the Q&A section here. So we have a few questions, maybe a minute on each max. I want to let's try and end it by 11 if we can. But okay, first one is, we are thinking about moving to Jetpack Compose. Should we make it a priority? Anyone?
I can take this. Maybe. Are you starting a new project? If it's a new project, definitely move to a newer tool. I think that is the best way for the future, because the whole community and industry is going to move to declarative UI. I'm quite certain of that. If it's a pre-existing project, then you would kind of have to evaluate it against the migration cost. For us, the most cost-effective way has been to, with any kind of migration, to use the same principle as you do for unit testing, saying whenever there's new code, whenever there's a bigger refactor, that's when you move something to Jetpack Compose. Other than that, you could wait until the community develops a bit more and you have more tutorials, more figured out things around performance and stability, and you can just easily jump in with lower costs.
All right. Walt, anything quick on that, or we move on?
Yeah, I mean, super quick. Anecdotally, our Android team has been aggressive, as I mentioned, and they have. And this is anecdata, so definitely don't take it for a fact. But they've told me that it's roughly about twice as fast to build UI using Compose, and obviously a lot of things are managed internally for you, and so you don't suffer from, like, if you accidentally screw up a constraint but it doesn't show up right away, but then, like, you know, 6 months down the line, once you add this exact view on the right place, like your entire UI goes to jank. We have less of that once we adopt there. But yeah, agree with Julius. Like, I think the new stuff that we want to transition into declarative UI is definitely probably the way to go. But on the iOS side, like, we've been thinking about trying to migrate, and it is always such a huge trade-off thinking about, okay, now we have features that work, that are built well in UI kit, and now you have to kind of move it over, right? So yeah.
Got it. Awesome. Okay, appreciate that. Well, I'm going to stick with you. This is obviously coming, I imagine, from a Sentry employee, but we got to ask it. So how does Sentry fit into your monitoring approach when it comes to mobile? And then second part is, how did you choose to partner with Sentry?
Yeah, so we've almost used all of, well, actually, I don't know, Don, you might even know this, on how much we've used like Sentry's features in the past. We try to stay like up to date. I think, you know, what typically happens is, what I found is the Sentry team is really good at understanding what, you know, us as developers want. And so I have noticed a pattern of, we build something internally because we're like, oh, we should start tracking this. And then turns out that, you know, we have a tool, but it's like, it kind of works. And, you know, it works enough to like solve our use cases, but it's like clunky to use. Only certain people really know how to use it to its full potential. And then, you know, Sentry will come out with a full-fledged feature, right? Very recently, Sentry has like this performance and observability around spans. And so, you know, we can kind of track the entire essentially like down to the function of an entire span over like multiple seconds, right? So you can see like thousands of data points on a flame graph. And that's something we've always had in our backend world, but through Python's instrumentation, but not necessarily in Swift. And we used to write like all these little markers in code that would suck. And then you would have to interpret numbers and average them together. And only a few people actually knew how to read that. But then, you know, when Sentry comes out with tooling like this, it is super helpful because it's like there's an entire enterprise ready and production ready application to help you there. So we've kind of used Sentry for most of our mobile use cases on any types of, you know, stability and performance, and that goes from crash rates to hang rates. So even like fixing those things, just because we get better stack traces and things are grouped and tagged, it's just easier to get aggregate data and create conclusions.
Nice. Well, Walt, we have a job for you anytime. Look at that beautiful plug. We appreciate it. Julius, I will briefly hand this to you, and then we got to keep it going. And, you know, hashtag Owain Moss, give Owain a shout out if he's out there, all the good managers. But any add on there, Julius, or we can move on, whatever you'd like.
I hope he's listening to this, but I can't say anything about specifically how Sentry partnership started. I think Don would know more about that. For us, partnership has become closer due to performance monitoring. I can tell you how that started. It's just we have been tracking performance for a while. It's not a new thing. We have been using Firebase performance monitoring before. It just wasn't enough. We have evaluated other tools alongside Sentry as we were looking into adopting it. Sentry came out and very clearly on top based on the capabilities it offers. We don't want to have engineers, as I think Walt alluded to, that have to be experts in the area to be able to, you know, optimize performance at all, and for anyone to just be able to jump in and see something actionable. And that's where, you know, Sentry kind of helps us.
Beautiful. I love this built-in plug. It's fantastic. Thank you. Okay, next one. So we have one from Ty. Hi, I'd really love to hear, what do you think about cross-platform framework? Excuse me. We use React Native to develop our app. Most of the time it's enjoyable, but we did find sometimes it's hard to take precise control of any of the tiny details. For example, we currently have a headache with our app badge count. So a lot there, but who wants to maybe take that one?
So we used to use React Native at Nextdoor too, and it's pretty much for this reason we kind of gone off it. I think it was really helpful, and I would say it's not just cross-platform frameworks, but also like anything you think about that can be injected cross-platform, right? Web views is another like common, is another thread, it's a similar example. I think it's really nice early on when either the company is small or the product is on small scale, and it allows you to essentially spend this roughly the same amount of resources and get three clients out there, right? But as we have scaled, you just want custom things, and you need to care about performance. And often, in order to be cross-platform framework, you almost sacrifice a little bit here and there in order to make it cross-platform. So we found that as we scaled, it's just much easier and better to maintain, you know, 3 entirely native stacks. And so that's my opinion on it. I think it's great for prototyping. It's good early stage, but you know, once you get to our scale, it gets harder and harder to maintain like a cross-platform application.
Nice. Julius, thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Walt. It is great for prototyping or even just pumping out a lot of apps in quite a short time. There's a lot of libraries, some of the JavaScript libraries are available if you want to make an app on both platforms quickly. Great, that's the way to go. But as Walt said, when you scale out, it may become no longer cost effective to do it that way. I do find that the companies that do scale up and are still using React Native are essentially very closely aligned to React Native framework themselves. They contribute back to the framework. They're bigger companies that have essentially teams around the technology itself. If you are in between these two things, kind of scaled up, but not enough to have that level of investment, it usually is not as effective.
Got it. Okay, one more. Which design pattern is preferable in terms of robustness, scalability, performance, and security? Why? Anyone want to take that hot potato? Design pattern.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, just real quick. I'm not necessarily sure how to fully answer this, but I mean, just from a app perspective, right? I personally believe in native code, and also it's, you know, we throw around terms like MVVM a lot nowadays, but I think the high level crux is you kind of want observable data flow. Observable and unidirectional data flow. And that helps so much as you scale if you only have data going like one direction. And when it changes, you can broadcast that update to a bunch of subscribers or observers. I find that has helped so much here at Nextdoor. And that's like as much probably like high level as it can get. I think, you know, architecture is very context specific otherwise, and it's hard to say like, you know, there's one architecture we should use, right? I think it's a lot on trade-offs at that point.
I would say no, my architecture is right. You're wrong, Walt. No, but I agree. I think the community has evolved, or the patterns have evolved to kind of say, you know, that unidirectional works out best across all of these different projects we're all working on. There's nothing creative, whether you go to the VM, MVI, Viper, clean architecture, and combine with these, whatever works for you is the right answer. In reality, the design pattern by itself is not gonna solve the performance or security problems. So you do need to analyze these separately. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Okay, last question. And this is, again, kind of futuristic, I guess. Are you thinking about leveraging new AI capabilities in your development process? Do you have like any R&D associated to that? Maybe just elucidate on the future there.
On my end, I personally have used, I guess, ChatGPT in a way to help. I know other developers here at Nextdoor have actually used, what's the one from Microsoft, Copilot, GitHub Copilot, but that was much better in like, you know, the Visual Studio editor. Whereas on Xcode, if you want to use it, it works, but you have to like use it outside of Xcode and import code in, which is just like not really worth it. But I've definitely asked a bot to like help me convert some Objective-C before, or write me some doc strings for a function where I was just like, you know, this is something that is self-explanatory, but that a AI can actually parse and quote unquote understand, right? At least to like do like a semantic under lexicon analysis of code and generate some doc strings. But nothing really more advanced than that. I don't know if Julius, you have something you know that I need to get on.
No, my experience is similar. I'm just looking at my calendar. I do see a meeting in a few hours about AI. So, maybe this question should be asked later.
Oh,
No, I'm kidding though. I have used AI tools to similar degree as Walt, basically either interacting with ChatGPT for personal things or using Copilot. For mobile coding, the Copilot type of tools haven't been as useful. The auto completion is compared to what I offer, and most value I've got of it was with web code, with JavaScript, with the same things Walt talked about before that are just like a lot more supported, or there's a lot more going on around it. And then, AI is able to learn a lot more about it and then tell you things. The Chat GPT is, I know that I've recently had some hype, but I don't see a lot of use of it yet. I have used some of the AI tools for copies, for writing up some stuff, for generating some images. That is more value for me personally than just like coding tips. It's quicker for me to just Google something. I do see some value interacting with ChatGPT, same as how you differentiate junior developer between a senior developer is essentially how good person is in Googling things. And if you build up a skill to ask right question, that may be valuable in the future as these tools become more of a thing.
wow. Okay, good. How good you are at Googling things is a key differentiator. I love that.
It's true.
Great. So we'll end on that note, gang. Again, I want to thank you so much, Walt. I look forward to having beers in San Francisco. Julius, maybe we can go polar bear watching somewhere in the Great North, and I can come visit. But yeah, again, gang, thank you so much. I do want to remind folks that we'll be sharing a survey, so please give us your thoughts. We'll also be sending out a recording. And again, Sentry's mission is to serve every developer, so please interact with us on GitHub, ping our Discord channel, and then we're on all the socials, so reach out then. And again, thank you so much, gang, for joining today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for running the session.
Hey, you know what? First moderator experience of my life, so hopefully it went half well. But I'll sign us out, guys. I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.